All right, and we're live. What's up, bros and besties? It's late and your girl is tired, but I could not let the rest of the week go by without me talking to y'all about the WNBA CBA deal that was just reached, at least in theory. It's a handshake deal. All right. It's a handshake deal. There's still stuff that they need to do in terms of getting the legalese on paper, in terms of making this official. And I'm hoping that my audio is okay because I kind of rushed into this live, but I was just like, fuck it, we're gonna do it. I've been trying to get this done since earlier this week, and it's been a busy week for me. So here we are. And I do have some shout outs and call outs, but I did want to make sure I started this off with letting you know we are going to talk about the WNBA CBA and what it means. And if you can tell from the thumbnail, I have thoughts. I have thoughts on what the details are that have been released so far. I have thoughts about the implications and things that I'm going to be watching for moving forward. So shout out to anybody who's watching live. If you are watching and you have any questions or comments that you want to throw in the chat, feel free. I'll take a look at those. And then also shout out to the replay crew because I feel like with at this time of night, that's where the majority of the views are gonna come from. So good morning, and feel free to throw your comments and questions in the comment section. All right, so let's go through some of these shout outs and call outs. I don't have a lot. Um, I do want to say, and I'm going to try to pull up this video, but I do want to say, first of all, shout out to Travis Etienne for finally correcting people on his last name. This is something that happened between now and the last episode that I did. And I know it's relatively old news, but I wanted to make sure and shout him out because as a fellow Louisiana native, this was kind of a big deal for me. It meant a lot for me to hear him correct this because, one, I know what it's like to be sick and tired of people constantly saying your name wrong and constantly spelling your name wrong. Um, and it honestly, it shouldn't be that damn hard. But I realize why it's hard, especially with the videos in response to him correcting his name. He's like, "Yeah, my name is pronounced Achan." And people are like, "No, it's not," in the comments. And so I'm just like, oh yeah, it's even harder than it was several years ago because now you just have like ignorant people who are determined to be ignorant and who are determined to be assholes who will sit there and tell a person that the way that they pronounce their name is not how they pronounce their name. um but yeah, for those not in the loop on this, for several years, apparently since college, so that would mean about 9 years for him, Travis Achan was going by Travis Etienne. And as a fellow Louisiana native, it made me feel crazy because I'm looking at this, right? And the way things are pronounced, like for example, my stepmom, her last name is Crechan, but it's spelled Chretien, right? But I'm used to seeing that Etien or Etienne pronounced Achan. So I see this and I'm like, okay, that's Travis Achan. And then people are like Etn, and I'm like, hmm, that's weird. But shout out to him for correcting people finally. Now that he's been picked up by the New Orleans Saints, he's like, I'm back in Louisiana and I can tell people how to say my name. It shouldn't have been an issue in the first place, though. So shout out to him, but also calling out the people who work in sports media, whether it's as an announcer, a ref, coach, anybody who has to deal with names. Um, it shouldn't be this hard. Like, saying somebody's name right is a sign of respect. And so it shouldn't have taken 9 years and switching teams for this man to get people to say his name right. But shout out to him. I'm glad that he finally corrected that. I don't cover the Saints as nearly as much as I used to, but yeah, good for him. He's from Jennings, Louisiana, by the way, for anybody who's curious. Next shout out, just a general shout out to the Dallas Cowboys for making some good roster moves. I'm seeing versatility, I'm seeing flexibility, I'm seeing moves that are smart. And like we said at the beginning of free agency, this free agency period for the Dallas Cowboys, especially considering the number of changes that they need to make in terms of personnel on the defense, is going to be a combination of really good moves and then them just hoping to find a diamond in the rough, guys that don't already have a name but are going to have to make a name for themselves in order to prove their value. So shout out to the Dallas Cowboys. Also shout out to Jerry Jones and AT&T Stadium and the city of Arlington for pulling off the Grand Prix of Arlington. So they had a Grand Prix race there over the weekend, and if you saw the race course, it kind of looked like if there was like a live action Mario Kart with an AT&T Stadium theme. and drivers described it as perfect, so it might be back. I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't get a chance to go, but shout out to them. Arlington is like 20 minutes away from me, so like I was kind of sad that I didn't get to go, but that was pretty dope. All right. And then one more major topic that we need to talk about before we get to I want to move this light. One more major topic that I want to talk about before we get to the WNBA CBA deal negotiations, the handshake agreement that is on the table and being finalized. Um, the World Cup. We got some World Cup news. And I would really love to have some good World Cup news to share, like something exciting, some happy news. But unfortunately, it's another controversial headline. So essentially what's happened now is FIFA has declined the request of Iran's men's soccer team to relocate their World Cup matches from the US to Mexico. So in case you live under a rock, right now, Iran and the US are basically at war. And the Iranian team expressed concerns about their safety. And before I continue, shout out to the people who keep telling me to keep politics out of sports. I try, but then stuff like this comes up. So that's somebody else who's being shouted out in this segment. So shout out to y'all. But anyway, back to the story. So the Iranian team expressed concerns about their safety, and Donald Trump basically refused to guarantee their safety. According to Gian Infantino, who's the president of FIFA, Infantino was like, "Oh yeah, I talked to Trump. He said it'll be fine. He said that'll be safe. That they'll be safe." But then Trump goes on Truth Social and says that it wouldn't be "quote unquote" appropriate for the Iranian team to participate in the World Cup out of consideration for their lives and their safety. And I'm like, why are we threatening civilians? But whatever. I would say that's mild compared to other shit that man has done recently. But anyway, he basically threatened civilians, those civilians being the Iranian men's soccer team. And so naturally, they hear about that and they're like, yeah, we don't feel comfortable participating in the World Cup in the US. And normally, there wouldn't be other options. In the past, events like the World Cup are hosted by one area, one city. But this particular World Cup is being hosted by 16 different cities across 3 different countries. There's multiple cities in Mexico that are hosting World Cup games. And so Iran was hoping to have their games moved to one of those cities. And FIFA was basically like, no, that would take too much work because it would mean people who have bought tickets would have to change the tickets. The teams that you're competing against would also have to change their games. And essentially, they just said that it's too much to work around in order to change it. So they're like, yeah, you're just going to have to play in LA and Seattle. That's where their games are scheduled to happen right now. So I just want to be clear about something considering all that, though. Uh, the FIFA president, John Infantino, has been criticized for being really chummy with Donald Trump, but this was not a decision that he made on his own. This isn't something that he decided by himself. So, in addition to Infantino, you have Matthias Grafstrom. I just talk about saying people's names right, so I hope I said that right. But I will say, if Matthias did put out a video saying, "Hey, this is how you say my name," it wouldn't take me 9 years to correct it. So, just putting that out there. But Matthias Grafstrom, he's the Secretary General of FIFA, and he was actually the first person to comment after the attack started on February 28th. So after it became worldwide news that the U.S. and Israel were attacking Iran, he actually came out then and said he was looking forward to all the countries participating as planned. So they made it known then that they weren't planning on changing anything. So in addition to him, you've got the FIFA Council, which is made up of 37 members representing all 6 geographic regions. And they're the ones who set dates, they control the formats for tournaments, and they are also the ones who make urgent decisions when the full FIFA Congress is not in session. And so they altogether reasoned that relocating matches at this point, months away from when the World Cup is supposed to start, they said it's unworkable. And to be clear, something else to be clear on is the fact that there's no precedent for a country participating in a World Cup hosted by a country that it's at war with. Like, yeah, there's tension, there are conflicts, There are questions of human rights, things of that nature. But as far as a country going to a country that it's at war with in order to participate, that specific scenario is actually unprecedented. And so it's difficult to make decisions. It's difficult to predict the decisions that they will make. But there is supposed to be, I forget what exactly the meeting is going to be called, but there is supposed to be a meeting of some of the decision makers in FIFA in April. And they might discuss this in April and come to some sort of conclusion about what to do or how to handle it, especially considering the fact that Iran is now saying that they're going to boycott the US matches. So they're saying they're preparing to participate in the World Cup, but they're also going to boycott the US. Now, if you've been following along with what I've said over the past few minutes, you know that is in direct conflict with what FIFA said about how they are planning for every country to participate as scheduled. So FIFA might be in a position to say, like, okay, do we want to preemptively do something about this? They're not going to change the locations. They've made that clear. So the only other option would be to either allow FIFA to boycott, which could lead to forfeiting those matches, or they could say, all right, well, since you've made it clear that you're going to boycott, we're just going to eliminate you from the World Cup. We're going to disqualify you. We're going to cut you out and we're going to replace you with another team. That is another decision that FIFA could make and replace them with another a team that didn't initially qualify. If Iran were to pull out, right now the speculation is that they would be replaced by I want to say I read either Saudi Arabia or the UAE. I don't remember exactly, and I'm sorry. This is another night where my notes are kind of all over the place. Just fair warning. Um, but that basically is where we stand with that. And just FYI, this is also not the first time that Iranian athletes have found themselves in the midst of controversy. Um, so there was a situation in 2022 with the Men's World Cup where the Iranian team did not sing the anthem before a game against England and did not celebrate the 2 goals scored in a 6-2 loss. And that was at a time where there was turmoil in Iran, several weeks after the death in police custody of a 22-year-old who had been detained for allegedly violating Islamic dress code. And so there was controversy at that time. Um, and then there's also the recent situation involving the Iranian women's soccer team, several of whom are still in Australia on humanitarian visas. They also recently did not sing the anthem in advance of games, reportedly in protest or having something to do with their perception of the conflict between Iran and the US. It's not really clear what their specific stances were, but they didn't sing the anthem. And someone who worked for the Iranian media declared them wartime traitors and said they should be dealt with harshly. And so several of them didn't even want to go back to Iran. And they have since returned, but it's reported that some of them only returned because threats were made to their families. Just for the people who are like not valuing free speech these days, like let's just think about how much value that does have and the difference that it actually does make in situations like that, for example, because while there's a lot of controversy about who's being censored here and what's being considered patriotic or non-patriotic, I think one thing that we can say is typically, even when athletes participate in a protest that most, or I won't even say most, that some citizens don't approve of, typically there's not that sort of like threat to their families, like threats of their safety or the ability of them to like stay alive. um and then there was also a situation where, let's see, there was one more situation. Well, I won't read about it. You can just Google Iranian athletes and the controversies that they've been involved in. Since I can't find this last example, it involved Iran's first female athlete to win an Olympic medal, Kimia Aliz, Alizadeh. I think that's how you say that. She was a bronze medalist at the 2016 games and she criticized wearing the mandatory hijab headscarf. She ended up competing for the Olympic refugee team in Tokyo in 2021 and for Bulgaria in 2024. So basically, she ended up no longer being an Iranian athlete after that. So that was the other example I was thinking of. So that's the situation that we're dealing with now regarding Iran and the World Cup. If there are any updates on that, I'll bring that to you, of course. And then one more update related to something that we discussed on this channel before was the funding of some of the US host cities where they were saying that there might be quote unquote drop dead dates where they might have to cancel either fan festivals or maybe FIFA World Cup matches if they didn't get the funding that they needed in order to prepare for the World Cup, specifically in terms of security. And so it looks like since then the funding has been doled out. The DHS itself, the part that led to the funding being withheld, that is still being discussed. So the DHS funding is still being debated. I believe they are still kind of in a holding pattern. However, it looks like the money that was supposed to go out from FEMA for the cities to prepare from a security standpoint, that has gone out. So it was $625 million dollars that was supposed to be sent to or split among the various host cities. And then there's also been a $250 million grant sent to the host states, split up between the 11 states for them to work on drone mitigation. So millions of dollars being spent on security for the World Cup. And the money was split up based on what they perceive to be the risk level of the venues. So the states that got the most money are California and Texas. Cities that got the most money are Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, and Houston, followed by Miami, and then Boston, who are still up in that $20 million range, if that gives you any indication of what's being anticipated in terms of the security need of the various cities. So it looks like things are moving forward, although by a bit of a delay, but they are moving forward. And the fan festivals seem like they'll be held as planned. The matches seem like they'll be held as planned. Millions of dollars are going into security. So while the headlines are not exactly a call for celebration, there are some people who are outright worried. It does seem like they're doing what they need to do in order to mitigate threats and handle what they perceive to be security threats in terms of cybersecurity and drone security. So there's that. Um, there are a lot of details related to that, but I'll wait and see if y'all say anything about that in the comments before I get too deep on that. But long story short, the funds were originally supposed to be dispersed on January 30th. And although the DHS itself, the budget for the DHS is still being discussed, the funds were sent out because they basically decided that it wasn't that the budget needed to be decided on, it was at the part of the budget that controlled the female workers who would be in charge of dispersing the funds was an issue. So they basically, I don't know, they did something in order to make sure those people got paid and the cities got their money. And I'll go into more detail on that if y'all ask more questions, but that's where we are. Okay. So once again, shout out to the people who say to keep politics out of the sports. Good times, right? Um, but then again, I usually get that comment about keeping politics out of sports when I talk about things like race and talk about things like gender. And so maybe that's what people mean when they say keep politics out of sports. They don't want to hear about race and gender. So if that's the case, well, then when it comes to this particular episode, y'all are about to hate this episode because I'm about to talk about women. I'm about to talk about queer women. I'm about to talk about women of color getting paid, getting paid. So let me pull up those notes real quick so I can make sure and get y'all some accurate details about the WNBA CBA negotiations, where we're at, what's next, and why some of us are like, we're celebrating. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy about the CBA. I'm happy about the details that have been released so far. I don't want it to seem like I'm like not happy for the players. I 100% am. However, there are some of us who have been following the situation who are still keeping our eye on certain things. We're still keeping our eye on certain details just to see how it plays out. And I'm going to tell y'all why as we go through these notes. So, I just realized I have a blank screen next to me. I should pull up a picture or something for you guys. Give me a second. There were some pictures released of them celebrating, so I'll just put that up so that we have at least some sort of at least some sort of image for you guys. Let's see. We'll open this image and I'll share it. Boom. No more blank screen next to me. and I don't have to change my layout. Awesome. All right. So over the past week or so, the WNBA and WNBPA representatives have spent hundreds of hours bargaining in a hotel in New York. Hundreds of hours. So some of these meetings reportedly went into the wee hours of the morning, like, starting at early in the morning, like 9, 10 in the morning, and going to like apparently about 3 a.m. the next morning. And so they've finally reached at least what they're calling a handshake agreement regarding the WNBA CBA. And so if you're watching this, you might have heard the details already, but I'm going to go over them just for the people who may be hearing these details for the first time. So, one of the things I want to point out is the fact that words like historic and transformational have been used a lot, have been used a lot. But honestly, regardless of who quote unquote won this deal, it was going to be historic and transformational anyway. Because even if the WNBA representatives got everything that they wanted, it was still going to be an increase based compared to what the WNBA players got in 2025 and before then. So you'll hear the words transformational and historic, and they definitely do apply, but that doesn't necessarily indicate who won or how much they won by. So, going by what they got and in comparison to 2025, we'll start with the salary cap. So they're saying the salary cap starting with this season is going to be $7 million and for each team, and it's going to go up each year. And that's compared to a salary cap of 1.5 million in 2025. So do y'all remember like around the time of the pandemic when there were some reports of WNBA teams not being able to pay their players, and then there were NBA players who were actually paying the entire salaries of whole WNBA teams? That was why. Because literally the entire salary cap of a WNBA team for a while was lower than like a bench rider of an NBA team. It was crazy. So they're going up from 1.5 million to $7 million. That's a great jump. Definitely a win. Originally, based on the players' proposal, that salary cap would have been 9.5 million, and based on the league's original proposal, it would have been 5.65 million to 6.2 million. So compromise there. The Supermax, so the superstar players and the max deals that they can get were previously $249,000. They're going up to 1.4 million. The average salary was previously $125,000. It's going up to 600,000. The minimum salary was previously 66,000. It's going up to 300,000. And so you can see from these numbers, we're seeing increases of like 400 and 500% when it comes to the salaries, minimum, average, supermax, and the salary cap. And this is a result of what's being reported as a revenue share of 20% for the players, compared to 9.3% previously. And that's reportedly 20% of gross revenue. And that's important to remember because of some details that we're going to get to in a second. But based on the way the CBA was constructed previously, the estimated percentage of gross that players were getting was 9.3%, and now that's going up to about 20%. So that's lower than the players' proposed 26% of gross, but it's still higher than the league's estimated 15.5% of gross. So what the WNBA wanted to do was they wanted the players to get 70% of net, which they estimated would end up being about 15.5% of gross. And there was a time when the WNBA players, they actually were asking for somewhere around 42% of gross, which is a really high number. And you might hear that number, especially if you're a fan of men's sports, you might hear that number and be like, that's not that high. Because when we talk about the NBA and the NFL, we're talking about players getting 48, 50, 52% of gross, right? So you hear 42% of gross, and the WNBA is like, no, 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 we can't do that. That'll put us in debt. And I'm gonna tell you why in a second. But after that initial pushback and the WNBA saying like, no, we can't do that, that's when they went down to 26%. And it sounds like the terms that they're agreeing to now are closer to 20%. Hey, Royal, good to see you in the chat. I don't know if you follow the WNBA, but if you have any questions about the CBA that's being negotiated, feel free to throw them in the chat. But thanks for saying hi. And so those are the dollars and cents based on the details that we have so far about the WNBA CBA and what's been verbally agreed to. And some of the things that we want to keep an eye on in terms of what's coming up or what we hope to see in the final version are some of the terms related to housing, retirement benefits, the qualities of the facilities, and family planning. There's some other details as well, but we'll get to that in a second. So, what's the catch when it comes to this CBA? What are some of the compromises that were made that led them to 20%? And why are there people like me who are skeptical? So, this is what I really wanted to get to tonight because I feel like every other media outlet is celebrating and they should. And every other media outlet is pointing out the good things and they 100% should do that. But I guess the way that I've been following this whole time, I've been following it with keeping an eye on what the WNBA might try to do and also what the NBA might try to do. And the reason I've been doing that is because it feels like from the very beginning, the WNBA didn't really show the players the level of respect that I felt like they deserved. Even from the beginning, with waiting months and months to even send out the initial proposal, and then reports coming out that the reason why the WNBA waited and the reason why the WNBA didn't even really address some of the things that the players said that they were looking for in that initial proposal was because the WNBA supposedly didn't expect the players to be so prepared for these negotiations, didn't expect them to come to the table with an understanding of how the revenue was being split and what they were owed and what was fair and what wasn't fair. And my thing is this: if you want to show a group of people or a person, anybody, if you want to show respect, two things that you need to do are respect their time and also take them seriously. And those are two things that the WNBA failed to do from jump. So this entire time that I've been following these negotiations, I've been following it with that in mind, keeping in mind the fact that the WNBA, from the very beginning of these negotiations, basically ever since the players said that they were opting out of the past CBA, they've been kind of in so many ways showing that they didn't really respect the players, you know? And so that's why when Nafisa Collier said what she said, I was like, of course they're gonna say that this is the worst leadership in the world because, like, look at how they're being treated by said leadership, right? So let's talk about the WNBA and the NBA and how we got to this 20% number. I'm gonna need y'all to follow me on this. If I lose y'all, please tell me in the chat that I've lost y'all. So, something else, in addition to the disrespect by the WNBA, that I feel like did not get discussed nearly enough as people were talking about the negotiations and what was holding up the negotiations and some of the details that might have been sticking point, is the fact that the WNBA is still largely owned by the NBA. And that has affected various aspects of the operation of the WNBA, including media rights, for example. So, on paper, the NBA controls about 42% of the WNBA. So when I say that the NBA owns a large portion of the WNBA, I mean, like, that's pretty big. 42% is pretty big. So on paper, you've got 42% controlled by the NBA. And then you've got another 42% that's held by WNBA specific owners. And then you've got about 16% that's held by an outside investor group. But that investment group is also partially made up of NBA owners and stakeholders. And so between the outright NBA ownership and then the NBA stakeholders and then the WNBA team owners who are also NBA team owners, some estimates place the NBA control of the WNBA at around 60%. I've read articles that place that number as high as 75%. But even if it is in that 42% to 60% range, that's still enough to raise some questions about things like the media rights deal that was recently agreed to, for example. So the NBA recently agreed to a historic, we're going to use that word a lot tonight. The NBA recently agreed to a historic media rights deal starting with the 2025-26 season, and it's 11 years for $2.2 billion, right? But because of the NBA's stake in the WNBA, they included the WNBA games in the package and assigned the WNBA a value of about $200 million annually, which was also historic for the WNBA, right? So big numbers, good numbers. However, critics of this deal pointed out that $200 million annually is about 3% of the entire deal. even though the WNBA actually accounts for closer to 13% of the total watch hours. In other words, the WNBA's portion of the deal actually accounts for less than 25% of the portion of the viewership that they're actually bringing to the table. So, like, while these numbers are historic, it's not necessarily fair compared to, what you would expect if things were proportional. Okay. But wait, there's more. So, because the NBA owns 42% of the WNBA, a large portion of the media rights money actually goes back to the NBA and its owners. So it's estimated that out of that $200 million that's supposed to be, or that was estimated as the value for the WNBA as part of that package, out of that $200 million, it's estimated that the WNBA only gets 84 million of that counted towards its revenue. So that's a very small portion. Like when you look at it as the fact that they were already only getting 3%, and now they're getting even less than that because of what the NBA is owed. So there's some people who argue, like, hey, if it weren't for them being bundled, it would be even harder for the WNBA to get time slots on major networks like ABC, ESPN, and NBC. But on the flip side, the bundle and its lack of an opt out clause means that it'll be very difficult for the WNBA to actually cash in if the popularity of the WNBA increases. So we're still looking at, this kind of back and forth between, okay, what would the WNBA be capable of without the NBA versus, okay, what's fair based on the numbers that we're actually seeing. So when it comes to the media rights deal, luckily, even though the NBA's media rights deal doesn't have an opt out, the WNBA actually does have two options available right now. So they're still able to negotiate separate deals with channels like Ion, CBS, and USA Network. And reportedly, all the parties involved have agreed to reevaluate the terms in 3 years to ensure that they actually reflect the NBA's actual growth. So I want y'all to think about that number, 3 years. It's something to keep an eye on. And it's something when it comes to how the media revenue is accounted for in the new CBA, and in terms of what those numbers will look like in the coming years. If you are someone who's enough of a fan of the WNBA to keep an eye on the CBA, to keep an eye on how the revenue is calculated and distributed, the media rights is definitely something that you'll want to be keeping an eye on. And you might be wondering, like, 3 years, why is it going to take 3 years to figure out what the value of the WNBA is if we have the numbers now, if we can see that they account for 13% of the total watch hours right now? Why do they have to deal with this deal that seems so unfair for 3 years? And why can't they get that value immediately? Well, that brings us to another point of the CBA, which was probably a sticking point in negotiations, which is the risk involved with gross revenue. So I want you to put a pin in the points about media rights. We're going to come back to that, but we'll connect those dots in a minute. But I do want to talk about the gross revenue and why the WNBA didn't want to give them a percentage of gross revenue and what it means that they did get it, or what it potentially means that they did get it. Okay. So there's been a lot of talk about the players receiving 20% of gross revenue. That is more than double of what they got of gross beforehand. So definitely an improvement. But why is it so far from the 50-ish% that the players for the NFL and the NBA get? So there's an answer, and there's a few reasons for it. So um, there was a point when, like I said, when the players did want about 40 to 42% of gross revenue, and the WNBA shot that down immediately. That wasn't even a negotiating point. The players had to come way down from that number immediately. And so the reasoning that the WNBA gave at the time was that um, giving the players that big of a share would lead to hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. So one of the things they had to think about was the fact that things like travel, marketing, paid staff, use of arenas for games, those things all have certain costs regardless of what the WNBA's actual revenue is. So there's only, once you cover those things that are essential to the operating expenses for a professional team, there's only so much money left over to give the players after expenses, right? So one thing that we have to consider is that the growth in 2025 was literally unprecedented. Like it was unprecedented in terms of the raw numbers that the WNBA saw, and it was unprecedented in terms of the jump that the WNBA saw year over year. So going back to the media rights deal that we talked about and that 3-year waiting period, basically there are people, there are stakeholders who want to see if the WNBA actually sustains the current interest, the current viewership, and most importantly, the current revenue, right? So they want to see like, will it increase on the same trajectory? Will it take a dive? Was it a fluke? Is it a cultural anomaly or a sign of things to come? So you got to think like, are there owners and stakeholders who are hesitant to buy into the growth and they're afraid that maybe they're giving the players too much too soon? Are they afraid that it'll backfire? Like, abso-fucking-lutely, yes. So essentially, like they're agreeing to these terms with the players, but there are some people who are scared that this is going to lead to them losing money. There are some people who are scared that they won't be able to like keep up with this level of growth, that they won't be able to keep these numbers up, and that they're going to end up regretting it. And so let's actually dive into that a little bit because there is a portion of the sports crowd who likes to take those numbers and the fact that the WNBA operated at a deficit for so long, and the fact that their operating expenses are so high in comparison to their revenue, and the fact that their revenue is so low in comparison to the NBA. They like to take that as an opportunity to basically like talk shit about the WNBA. So I want to address some myths there. Let me pull something up real quick. I might not be able to pull it up on your screen. Let's see. What I'm looking for is I saw a table of revenue comparing the WNBA to the NBA. Okay. So we're gonna talk about a couple of things here. Recent revenue, and then I'm going to go back to what the NBA was doing when it was at the same point in its growth at the WNBA. So, when we're talking about current operating expenses, right, and why the WNBA players couldn't get closer to that 42% or that 50% that male players gets, right? So, like I said, things like travel, marketing, paid staff, arena usage, those all have set costs regardless of what the revenue is. And so when it comes to the NBA and their revenue, they're basically able to better handle those costs than the WNBA is. So giving NBA players 50-ish percent of the NBA revenue is not nearly as risky as trying to give WNBA players 50% or 42% or apparently 26%. So here's what we're looking at starting with 2021 NBA revenue versus WNBA revenue. So in 2021, the NBA pulled in 6.41 billion. The WNBA was at zero point 0.1 billion. All right. So that's like what like the WNBA would have been 64 times, like they had a they pulled in revenue that was 64 times higher than what the WNBA pulled in 2022. The NBA $10 billion, WNBA 0.15. 2023 NBA 10.6 billion, WNBA zero point 0.2 billion. 2024 NBA 11.3 billion, WNBA 0.23 billion. And this is where we see this big jump. 2025 NBA 12.25 billion, WNBA, it's they're still calculating, but they're estimating zero point 0.8 to 1 billion even. So you hear those numbers, and so that's why people are like, oh, the WNBA is experiencing like record breaking growth, historic numbers, like, but it's also unprecedented because you see that jump, which is more than 400% from 0.23 billion in 2024 to 1 billion in 2025. But that's still not a ton compared to the NBA's 12.25 billion. So the NBA players, they can get 50% and still get paid more. And it's not as much of a threat as what the WNBA is dealing with because their operating costs are such a bigger percentage of the pie than what it is for the NBA players. So I hope I explained that well, and I hope that makes sense. Now, this is a point at which some people, like I said, some people try to say things like, "Oh, well, that's just proof that the WNBA is failing. It's proof that the players shouldn't get paid." Da da da. And I want y'all to understand that people who say things like that, they're either just general haters and they hate on anybody who's winning, or they're misogynists, maybe both. And the reason why I say that is because what the WNBA is experiencing is not only is it normal, but one could argue that they're actually on a better trajectory than where the NBA was at this point in its development. So when it comes to the WNBA operating at a deficit damn near every year, there's still a debate about whether or not they were truly profitable in 2025 or whether or not they just hit certain metrics that triggered parts of the revenue share. But before that, on paper, they operated at a deficit. And there are some people who say, oh, it wasn't a true deficit. It has to do with, the NBA and their ownership and how they calculate expenses. Let's just say that on paper it's right and they were operating at a deficit. That is a normal part of the evolution of a pro sports association or league. Literally every professional sport has gone through that. The NFL was literally made up of failing professional leagues that had to combine their resources in order to create the NFL. And then the NFL was not immediately profitable. The NBA, same thing, made up of professional leagues that were failing to the point where they had to combine their resources and create the NBA. As a matter of fact, I'll give you more details. So for the NBA, it was the Basketball Association of America and the National Basketball League. And so back in the 40s, in the late 40s, they were struggling. The Basketball Association was founded by major arena owners and it had better funding, but it struggled with the quality of play compared to the NBL. The NBL was an older league and it was struggling to compete. And basically, those two leagues merged to ensure their survival and became the NBA. So this was back in the 40s. And then the NFL, it was comprised of the American Professional Football Association, largely by members of the failing Ohio League. And then there were some other regional, financially unstable Midwestern teams who all came together. So if you ever wondered why the NFL Hall of Fame is in Canton, Ohio, it's because basically these failing leagues were like kind of centralized in Ohio, and that's where the NFL ended up being founded, comprised of the All-American Football Conference and the American Football League. Um, and basically, in order to keep from entirely failing, they merged, combined their resources. And even today, you've got the UFL. So the XFL, as a matter of fact, it failed, came back, failed again, and then merged with the failing USFL to create the UFL, which still had to downsize. It's still failing. And that's a male dominated sport. That is a popular male dominated sport. Like football, gridiron football is one of the most popular sports in North America, and it's male dominated. So I say all this to say that the fact that the WNBA has been operating at a deficit, the fact that their revenue growth is taking a little bit of time, it's not because they're women. It's not because it's women's basketball. It's because that's part of the evolution of professional sports. So, knowing that, let's take a look at the NBA specifically. So, when this CBA finally takes effect, it'll be the WNBA's 30th season. And so, if we look at where the NBA was in its 30th season, let me go back. Sorry, I got too many tabs open, you guys. So the NBA in its 30th season was was operating at a deficit. I just want to be able to tell y'all by how much. So the NBA in its 30th season was operating at a deficit of about, I want to say it's 10 million off the top of my head, but I also want to find it. Okay, so they were operating at a deficit of about 15 to 20 million dollars, but this was in 1983. Okay, so in 1983, that's when the NBA did their first CBA agreement that awarded the players 53% of the gross revenue. Okay, so you might be thinking, all right, they were 30 years in. NBA players got 53%. Why can't the WNBA 30 years in get 53% for WNBA players? So there's a few reasons why. All right, even though both leagues have been operating at a deficit. So the WNBA has been operating at an estimated deficit of about $10 million per year. The NBA was operating at a total deficit of about 15 to 20 million dollars per year, and about 16 of their 23 teams at the time were not profitable. They were going under. The thing is, at the time, based on what the players were getting, they were actually getting closer to 57% of gross revenue. So that CBA actually brought them down to 53%. And it was a way for the NBA to actually remain profitable and not continue to lose even more money. So they were going from a higher number to a lower number. Now, if we were to adjust that for inflation, that 15 to 20 million dollar loss in 1983 would be the equivalent in 2026 of about 49 to 65 million dollars, right? So based on those numbers, if you compare the $10 million that deficit that the WNBA has been operating at compared to about 50 million if you adjust for inflation, the WNBA is actually doing better than the NBA was 30 years into its inception, right? The thing is, there are certain costs that the NBA didn't have to deal with that the WNBA does have to deal with. So some of those things include modern operating costs and arena use. So when it comes to things like infrastructure, travel and amenities, and then just the general arena economics, all of those things cost more now compared to what they cost in 1983. Okay, so that's why they were able to give the players 50 plus percent because there were just certain costs that they didn't have to account for. So, for example, things like analytics, sports science, digital marketing, these are all things that literally did not exist in 1983. Also, there's the fact that right now, for the sake of their security and safety, the WNBA has moved to a full charter flight program. Whereas in 1983, NBA teams still predominantly flew commercial. Also, most WNBA teams do not own their arenas and must pay high rent or revenue sharing fees to the NBA or NHL teams that primarily lease those buildings, further eating into their gross margins. All right. So those are just a few examples of the things that the NBA teams of the time did not have to deal with, not to mention just general inflation, and then there's also the ownership tax. So the WNBA's ownership structure is way more crowded compared to what the NBA was dealing with in 1983. So because the NBA owns 42% and outside investors own 16%, a significant portion of every dollar earned must be distributed to those stakeholders before it can be used for player salaries. And so one of the things that the owners were arguing during the 2026 negotiations is that a 30% or a 50% split would lead to $700 million in projected losses over the next decade because of the fixed equity obligations and rising operating costs alone. Those are both things that NBA teams did not have to deal with. So remember a few weeks ago when I talked about how women's sports or women were basically policed out of sports for a long time and it affected how they developed as athletes and just the quality of the competition and things like that. Basically, that same thing has also affected the business side to where the men's teams have kind of set the standard in terms of what's expected for facilities, for your staff, for your coaching, for marketing, so on and so forth. And now the women's teams have to adjust for that. They don't have this cool time period where costs are just extremely low because certain innovations haven't happened. They're having to deal with that cost at a relatively earlier point in their development. So just to reiterate, like I said, when people start talking about, oh, well, the WNBA is operating at a deficit and, they can't afford this and they can't afford that, that has nothing to do with them being women. It's a completely normal part of the development of a professional sports league and the teams that are part of any particular league or association. So, all right, so we've talked about the deficit, we've talked about the media rights. And so essentially, those are the main things that in the coming years could impact how the CBA plays out and what the numbers end up looking like and what certain things look like, especially when it comes to this possible re-examination of the media rights deal in 3 years or so. So, why is that important? Well, it's important because the words haven't been put on paper yet. And so that's another thing that people like me are looking at when it comes to the CBA and what it's actually going to look like. Because, for example, with the 2020 CBA, they negotiated it, they were happy about it. And then there were parts of it that ended up playing out a little bit differently than what they anticipated based on what they agreed on. And the reason for that is, and you've probably heard people talking about this, is the fact that there are, there are still steps that have to be taken in terms of actually putting the words on paper and getting the actual contract written up, when it comes to what's going to be how it's. I'm sorry, it's getting late and I can't talk. Hold on, we're going to rewind. Basically, they have a handshake agreement which outlines the things that they want the CBA to contain, right? So there's a term sheet, the players are going to vote on it, and then a group of lawyers are going to come together and basically translate all that into legalese, okay? So it sounds simple, but there's a lot that can go wrong. So we go back to the 2020 CBA and what happened. There were a few areas where this did happen. So I'm not just pulling this out my ass. This actually did happen. It did affect players and it affected them in a few different areas. So one, there was nope, this is not it. I told y'all I had my notes in way too many different places. Okay, so one of them I know, and I do have this article pulled up. It was the prioritization clause. And this was something that actually impacted, let's see, I'm gonna pull up this article real quick. So this was something that impacted Brianna Stewart directly. So y'all might remember this because although the CBA was from 2020, the prioritization clause and the issues with Brianna Stewart actually became an issue in 2023. So I'm gonna read y'all from this is a read and react from an article written by Just Women's Sports. And it says Brianna Stewart isn't thrilled about the new prioritization clause that goes into effect with the WNBA's latest CBA beginning in 2023. The most recent collective bargaining agreement signed in 2020 will look to have players prioritize the WNBA over other leagues. Beginning in 2023, players who are late to report to training camp will be levied a mandatory fine. So they're already not exactly satisfied with their pay. And now they're going to be fined for taking opportunities overseas to supplement that pay. Like it's crazy, right? So in 2024, players risk suspension for the entirety of the WNBA season. And this is a quote from Stewart. She said, prioritization is like the biggest topic of conversation in the WNBA for me, especially in the next couple of years. She added, to be able to play overseas at UMMC, where basketball is very valued, we're treated really well and able to make a lot of money. It's just hard for me. With prioritization, you're cutting off one of my sources of income and not substituting it. So this was something that was in the WNBA that they in the WNBA CBA that they approved, that they signed, that they celebrated, but they either overlooked it or they did not truly understand how it was going to affect just how they operated on a year-round basis, right? And I really want to find the other ones because it also related to things like charter flights and things of that nature. If I can't pull it up in a few seconds, then I'm just gonna skip it. But I know the charter flight thing was one of them because that is actually what led to the New York Liberty being fined. And so that was one of those things where it's like, okay, if they actually had an understanding of the CBA and how it was going to impact the players, impact operations, of course, they would not have willingly just suffered fines over something like charter flights, right? But once again, sometimes when you agree to certain things, you might overlook something, and then it ends up just looking different in terms of the contract, in terms of the legalese, and in terms of the legalese, as compared to what you expected when you initially agreed. Okay, I found it. So there was a prioritization clause that I just discussed, and then there was also the revenue sharing targets. According to my notes, it says the 2020 CBA included a mechanism for players to share in the league's growth, but the execution was hindered by its design. So basically, they had revenue targets based on 2019 figures and were made cumulative over the life of the deal. But because the 2020 season was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, the targets became mathematically, quote unquote, unrealistic to meet for several years. So that was something they didn't account for, even as the league's popularity skyrocketed in 2023 and 2024. And so players reportedly only hit the target for the first time in 2025. So basically, they didn't include a clause to account for things like a pandemic or, just any sort of natural disaster or worldwide disaster. The charter flight situation that I just brought up with you guys said that while the 2020 deal made gains in travel conditions, the rollout was a point of contention. So players initially accepted premium economy seats as an upgrade, but as the league grew, something that they didn't anticipate, the lack of full charter flights became a major safety and quality of life issue that felt quote unquote inequitable as the league's revenue increased. So full charter flights were only standard by the 2024 season. And then there was a salary cap stagnation. So the 2020 CBA initially boosted the cap by 30%. That was a win for them compared to the previous CBA. But it only increased by a fixed 3% annually thereafter. As a result, players found that their pay scales were not keeping pace with the league's massive growth in viewership and attendance, leading to the decision to opt out of the agreement entirely in early in late 2024. So those are four different areas that, based on the 2020 CBA, the players either just didn't anticipate or overlooked various aspects of the contract that they were agreeing to. They did not, basically, they couldn't read the future. They couldn't predict the future. And so they agreed to things that, like, by the time they got a few years into the CBA, they were like, wait, we didn't think this was going to play out like this. So part of the negotiations that people are anticipating in terms of what took it so long is that the players union was probably way more careful with the wording, way more careful with the wording. And so that's something that people are going to be looking for this time around once the legalese actually does come out, because naturally they're going to try to avoid things like this. But is it possible to avoid every sticking point or every loophole? Probably not. Like, think about, like, we all have a group chat with the homies, right? So like, think about the people in your group chat, and if y'all all came to agreement about how the group chat was going to operate and the rules and standards for your upcoming outings and like your girls trips or your guys trips, right? So y'all decide on the rules, and then you're like, all right, we need a group of neutral people, so like, let's get some of our coworkers together and they're going to put these rules on paper. Like, can you imagine the number of things that could go wrong, even with people who like each other and respect each other and who seem to have a great understanding? But like, once you try to account for every possible scenario in legal terms, things are just gonna get tricky. If you've ever signed an apartment lease and then something broke, or you need to get out of that lease, or if you've ever agreed to like car insurance or health insurance and then you need to actually use that insurance, you probably have an idea of how things can go wrong in comparison between what you thought would happen versus what's legally on paper, and especially when there's money involved. So that's something else that a lot of us are going to be looking for in terms of, okay, how is this CBA deal going to actually play out? Because while some of us are hopeful, the truth is WNBA owners, NBA stakeholders, they do have good reasons for wondering, like, okay, can the WNBA sustain this growth? They do have good reasons for looking at it and saying, all right, we want to be a little bit cautious here. And so while the deal is historic and it is good for the players, if somehow the growth is not sustained, it could also be very bad, because then it goes from being this historic example of what women are capable of to actually more of a cautionary tale of like, hey, if you are an owner of a women's sports team and they start growing, don't be too quick to give them too much, because that could be very temporary. It could last for only a year and it could take a dive. So while this is a historic deal, it's also very, very essential that the WNBA sustains that growth, which brings us to the last part that a lot of people are watching for, which is the cultural aspect of this, right? And so for this, you kind of have to think about what happened when NFL players and NBA players started getting paid, and the impact on culture, not only domestically, but worldwide. Because when we think about, for example, campaigns like Be Like Mike and Michael Jordan and how he became a global icon, once his shoe came out and things like that, right? And you think about what that could mean for this group of women. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we're talking about not just women. We're talking about a group largely composed of Black women, of queer women, right? And so now that we have this influx of cash, because like, let me go back to the numbers for you guys, just so we can put this in perspective. Why are my notes not loading? Here we go. All right. So if we look at these numbers and we look at what the WNBA players are actually getting. So the Supermax deal is going up from 249,000 to 1.4 million. The minimum salary is going up from 66,000 to $300,000. So that means the new minimum salary is higher than last year's Supermax salary. That is fucking bananas. And when that kind of money goes into a sports association, goes into a sports team, and goes into a group of athletes, the way they're perceived by society, the way they're perceived by global, I guess you could call it marketing campaigns, right? When it comes to the global recognition, when it comes to their marketing appeal, their marketing value, it changes, right? But one thing I've always said about the WNBA is that the WNBA has had to deal with something the NFL and the NBA never had to deal with, and that is misogyny and queer phobia. And those things do come into play because if we think about the Be Like Mike campaign and how when that campaign was rolled out and they went through steps, they were careful to like take color out of it, to take race out of it, to make it very apolitical. Like they wanted that to be a campaign for everybody. There's no politics involved, there's no race involved. This is just Michael Jordan. He's for everybody, right? But you can't do that with Arike Gumbawale. She's a black woman, she's queer. There's nothing you can do. There's no kind of campaign you can run that's going to take the politics out of her identity. She don't even have to talk about it. Like as soon as people know, it becomes an issue for some people, right? And so now we're looking at it not only from a perspective of can they sustain these numbers? What do these numbers mean in terms of how it's going to play out with the NBA ownership of the WNBA? But now we also have to look at it from a cultural perspective because basically whether they feel good about it or not, the WNBA and the NBA and the stake that they have in the success of these players means that they are going to want to market the league, the games, and the players in the right way. Okay. But when it comes to marketing, and when it comes to the fact that typically, especially in sports, apolitical marketing that does not address race, that does not address gender identity, that does not have anything to do with sexual identity, right? That type of marketing does better. How then do you deal with stars who are black and queer, and openly black and queer? And like, if you ever been to a Wings game, like Arike, like she done pulled a bad one too, right? So like they turn heads, you know what I'm saying? So we're not even talking about like, oh, she just lesbian by herself. Like, no, she be out with her girl and they cute. Same thing with Paige Beckers, because a lot of people are saying that Arike won't be with the Dallas Wings anymore, but Paige is still gonna be here. And people are saying that the Wings might also draft her girlfriend. So, what does that mean in terms of marketing that now has to be scaled up? How do you work that out? How do you balance marketing people like Arike Gumbawale and Paige Beckers? How do you balance that with the more traditional representations of people like Asia Wilson or Caitlin Clark? Right? So these are all things that the WNBA is going to have to deal with and navigate that the NBA did not have to deal with and did not have to navigate. You know what I'm saying? So there are definitely going to be some interesting things coming down the pipeline in terms of marketing, in terms of cultural representation, and how all those things like just interact with the economy around just the revenue, the viewership, and the attendance. And for those who might be thinking like, well, the WNBA is doing just fine now. Like all those players that I just mentioned, they're popular now and they're doing just fine, right? And they are. But what I'm talking about is scaling. As a matter of fact, let me pull something else up for you because I saw something. This is an older graphic, but I want to pull it up just to drive home my point, right? So let me see if y'all can see that. So this is a graphic that shows WNBA stars who are more popular than their teams. And so this is months old, so the numbers might not be accurate, but I'm pulling this up to basically show you guys that you have the marketing of the WNBA and the teams themselves, right? But then when it comes to the players, they have separate followings that are often bigger than the WNBA teams themselves. Why is that? Because like we just discussed, when it comes to sports, they typically stick to uh marketing that is a little bit more neutral, that appeals to more people, right? But when it comes to the generation that has really found itself invested in the WNBA, because the WNBA's audience is a lot younger than the NBA's audience. That's one of the reasons why it's growing so quickly. But that generation, they are very big on authenticity. Like, they love the diversity of identities. They want to see like different people, different lifestyles, different backgrounds. So they love it. And that's something that these players are able to do without the backing and support of their team. Like, they all have their own individual followings. So you can see the WNBA is up there at over 3 million. Caitlin Clark has almost as many followers. And this is according to Instagram numbers. Caitlin Clark is almost as many followers as the entire WNBA. And Angel Reese is above that. Now, why is that? So there is another form of marketing that works specifically for female athletes, and it's what they call heterosexy. Basically, there's a lot of people who follow Angel Reese. They don't even think she's a good basketball player. They just like how she looks. They like how she looks. But hey, they're followers. That's part of her influence. That's part of her impact. That's part of her reach. So it counts, right? So when it comes to the marketing, you've got everything from Caitlin Clark, who is relatively vanilla. You've got Angel Reese, who was just modeling for Victoria's Secret. You've got Arike Gumbawale, who like is the, I don't know, maybe you could call her the dream stud. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the term is for that particular demographic and who she appeals to, but I know there are a lot of people who love Arike and who talk about her hair and who talk about her look and who talk about her car and who talk about her girlfriend and how that's just like an ideal lifestyle for them, right? So all these players that you see, uh, and then some of these players, obviously, like I said, this is an old graphic because like Dejanay Carrington is no longer with the Dallas Wings, but you can just see how there are several players who have bigger followings than several WNBA teams, right? Now, even though these are relatively high followings, and I don't want to diminish the impact and the influence and the reach of these players, let's compare it to NBA and NFL players, because I think I have a chart for that somewhere as well. Let's see. Not that one, not that one. It might be this one. Nope, it's not this one. This is why I hate these late night lives, you guys. I be like, let me get home and go live. But then there are some parts in my notes I didn't think I was going to go over this tonight. But I might just have to pull it up again because I'm pretty sure if I just research it, I can find it. But essentially, there was a table I found that compared the followings of like LeBron James to Angel Reese. And it was something like, okay, here it is. Actually, I'm gonna pull this up so y'all can see it. So this is as of March 2026. So I just showed y'all a chart that showed like how Angel Reese has a bigger following than the WNBA as a whole, right? But then if we take players who have big followings for the WNBA and we compare them to NBA and NFL players, you see how they're below Patrick Mahomes. So you've got Angel Reese at 5.2 million now. Caitlin Clark at about 3.6 million. Patrick Mahomes is above both of them at 7 million. Steph Curry, 57.2 million. LeBron James, 159.7 million. So, like, even when we take the most popular, the most influential WNBA players, and then we compare them to NBA and NFL players, we see how their reach is still relatively small. So, why does this matter? It matters because if we go back to what I've been talking about since the beginning, which is the WNBA stakeholders and them wanting to wait 3 years before they reevaluate the media value of the WNBA. And we look at why the WNBA players are getting 20% of gross instead of 50% of gross like their male counterparts. If the next step for WNBA players is to get closer to that 50% or to get some more of the allowances, some more of the perks that their male counterparts have, They have to prove that their value is on par. That means increasing their marketing. That means no longer simply relying on the individual brand awareness of individual players. That means that the WNBA and the NBA, because they have ownership, are going to have to take their relevancy and take their reach and scale it up, right? And so I'm bringing this up to so that people can see, like, this is how big of a scale they're looking at. This is how much marketing, this is how much growth needs to happen in order to get closer and closer to those 48, 50% numbers that they're looking at. So it's like, yes, the growth of the WNBA is awesome. It's unprecedented. They are growing literally by leaps and bounds from a numerical standpoint, but there is still such a long way for them to go. And the path that they have to follow is definitely going to be impacted by things like race, like their gender identity, like their gender expression, like their sexual orientation. And so these are all things that we just have to watch out for. I'm not saying that these are things that are going to cause the WNBA to fail. I'm not saying that these are reasons why they shouldn't have got the deal. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm pointing out is that there are some of us who are watching this situation with a microscope or with a magnifying glass. It's like we're excited for the players, but we're also keeping our eye on certain things because knowing that things like media rights are going to play a role in how this CBA is perceived down the line and to how money is divvied up down the line and what ends up happening in terms of the WNBA sovereignty and what players get in the future. Knowing that, we're also going to look at, like, okay, who is the WNBA deciding to push to the forefront? Who are they marketing harder than maybe another player? What does this mean? What does this mean for the agenda that the WNBA is trying to push? And is that agenda actually good for the players, or is it in some way sabotaging the players? You know what I'm saying? So I know I got a little bit in the weeds here, you guys. This is like a peek inside my mind when I hear news like this and everybody's like, yay, great deal for the WNBPA. And I'm like, yeah, it's great, but I'm like, yeah, this is awesome, but this is what happens inside my brain, you guys. So thanks for sitting here and listen to me rant for an hour. I want to see what y'all are saying in the chat. So the real AJ says this is great stuff. Something you might have mentioned already, but maybe it's worth looking into is the history of how the ABA wasn't part of the inception of the NBA. I did address that for a second, and I don't know, maybe one of these days when I have nothing else to talk about, I can go deeper into how that happened because somehow. I don't know if people just don't know the history or if they forget the history, but it's just like people be out here like, well, the WNBA is operating at a deficit. And I'm just like, you mean like every other male sports league that it's ever existed? Yeah, yeah, it is a little bit. Like, God. Um, Clement just finished watching the NCAA's men's tournament. I did too, but I was only partially watching it. I had to get up like really early for work. And so I came home and I was watching Vanderbilt and McNeese because ironically, Vanderbilt's my alma mater, but McNeese is the school from my hometown. So like I was definitely invested in the game, but I definitely fell asleep. And then and then because like I wanted to do this live stream at like 7 o'clock, but I passed the fuck out and I didn't wake up till like almost 8. So here we are. Let's see what else y'all talking about. Oh, y'all are talking about the Cowboys. JV says, I want the Cowboys to trade for an elite edge rusher. We might talk more about their free agency moves maybe this weekend or something. And y'all are talking about players. Rail says, I'm actually hoping the Cowboys get Derrick Henry. I want the running back position to be good. Is that something that's actually on the table? Are the Ravens over him? I haven't really kept up with what's going on with him specifically in free agency. Clement says, I don't see us trading for an elite edge rusher, not willing to give up a first round pick for Max Crosby. I wonder if that had anything to do with what came out about Max Crosby's medicals, because supposedly the Cowboys were privy to whatever came out. That was a really weird situation, the way that all played out. But thanks for keeping the chat lively, even though y'all are talking about other topics. I love you guys. And I mean that sincerely. Like, I appreciate the fact that y'all support me enough to like show up and like listen and listen to what I'm talking about, even if y'all are interested in other things. But I don't have Cowboys news right now, nothing specific. Like, I've been watching and I just don't have like I don't have strong opinions on anything that they've done. Like I think I said at the beginning, I think they're making smart moves. It looks like they're making moves to consider their versatility, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But like, I don't have a problem with anything that they've done so far, and I also don't have very strong feelings about anything that they've done so far. Like when, for example, since you just brought up Max Crosby, when it first happened, I was like, why, why wouldn't they make a stronger case for trying to get Max Crosby if they're going to try to get him anyway? But then when all the news came out about the medicals, I'm just like, okay, well, I guess something happened on the back end, and they decided it was not a good move for them, and I kind of made peace with it at that time. But other than that, like, I don't have any strong thoughts right now. Right now. Now, once I start digging into who's who and getting a little bit more acquainted with some of the players, I might have some thoughts. But right now, I'm just like, cool. The Cowboys are making moves. Dope. I'm into it. Da, da, da. And according to Clement, the ship has sailed on the Cowboys getting Derrick Henry. And he says, I'm good with Javonte Williams as RB1. I'm also good with Javonte Williams as RB1. I feel like he did a good job. Um, I actually felt good about the running back room in 2025, especially the way that it was trending, because like they were actually trending upward. And it looks like, Malik Davis was actually getting better as the season went on. So I'm actually good with all of that. Getting Derrick Henry would be interesting, especially considering the fact that he did not have the best 2025. So, I mean, even with him not being a Cowboy, I'm kind of curious as to what he's going to look like in 2026. So that would have been an interesting move, but I can't really honestly say I would have been super excited about it, just because I would have been like, okay, well, what happened last season? Was that a fluke? Are you falling off? Do you need a better O line? Like, what's going on? I would have had a lot of questions. I would have had a lot of questions. But anyway, speaking of questions, if you are watching this after the fact and you have questions about the WNBA, CBA, anything that I didn't address, feel free to throw it in the comments. And I don't mind coming back and talking about any of this in more detail. I hope this wasn't too convoluted. I know this was a long episode, but I just wanted to make sure and give a thorough explanation of everything I've been thinking about and why I've been thinking about it, so that whenever it comes up again, people aren't like, wait, where the fuck is this coming from? But I do know that there are some other podcasts that are going to be going into detail about some of the stuff that I mentioned, like the housing issues, the family planning, hospitality. I think, if I can remember the name of this podcast, it's by The Athletic, and I want to say it's called No Off Season, the No Off Season podcast, by The Athletic. Depending on when you see this, there might be a link for them in the description, because I don't mind promoting other podcasts that I think are good. But I think they're going to be doing an episode where they go into even more detail about those aspects of the CBA. So I'm here to talk about the money and the culture part of it. Um, what's up, John? How's it going? I didn't realize so many of y'all would be like up this late. Maybe I need to do more 1 a.m. streams again. I don't know. I'm just doing when I have time. But good to see you in the chat. But yeah, like I was saying, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I'll get to them another time. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. And I'm I'm trying to think if I'm gonna do any watch alongs this weekend. I was thinking about it between the NCAA tournaments and and there's like some cool not Premier League. What is happening this weekend? Is it the Carabao Cup final? I think is on Sunday. I thought about doing a fun little watch along just for shits and giggles. Clement says we need to sort out RB2, wide receiver 3. Maybe so, Clement. But I'm gonna say none of those positions concern me as much as the defense. Like I would say I don't even have the bandwidth to think about those positions right now, because I'm that invested in what happens next with the defense. But yeah, keep your notifications on in case I decide to do any watch alongs, and meet me here. Thanks for joining me in the chat. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your support. Don't forget to hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe if you haven't, and make sure you turn those notifications on. This has been another episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and I'm out.
You only think of us as a bitches when you intimidated. Put it that way. I think
people look at a woman and she's an aggressive woman who's out to get what she wants to get. You know what I'm saying? Ambitious, and they want to say, you know, when a male is assertive, this is what he wants. He's looked at as a strong male, but yet when I get it, you know, I'm a bitch.
Exactly.
And if that's what I gotta be, exactly, to get what I want and to make it somewhere, then I'll just be there.